Jace Morrow woke up at 0430 station time, the same way he had every morning for the past 11 weeks. No alarm, no reminder on his datapad. His body just knew. That was what growing up on Earth did to a person. It carved discipline into the bone. He sat up on the narrow cot and placed his feet on the cold metal floor. The room was small, smaller than the dorm rooms back at the military prep school in Oregon, and that was saying something. But Jace did not mind small spaces. He had slept in worse. He had slept in rain. He had slept on rock. A metal box floating in space, with temperature control and filtered air, was luxury by his standards. He stretched his neck, rolled his shoulders, and dropped to the floor for push-ups. 50, then 50 more. Then he flipped over and did sit-ups until his stomach burned. After that he stood and worked through a series of slow, controlled movements. Joint rotations, balance holds, deep breathing, just maintenance, like sharpening a blade every morning whether you plan to use it or not. When he finished, he pulled on his gray academy uniform and looked at himself in the small mirror bolted to the wall. Brown skin, short black hair, calm dark eyes. He looked like no one special. That was fine. He preferred it that way. The only personal item in the room was a photograph pinned above the cot. It showed a forest, tall green trees standing in fog, a river cutting through the middle. Home, the Pacific Northwest, a place where the rain never really stopped, and the air always smelled like wet earth and pine. Jace touched the edge of the photo with one finger, then turned and walked out the door. The corridors of the Galactic Union Joint Military Academy were wide and bright and full of air that tasted wrong. Too much oxygen, too clean. It made his lungs feel lazy, like they were not working hard enough. The gravity was set to 0.8 g, which was the galactic average. For Jace, it felt like walking on the moon. His steps were too light. His body felt too loose. He had to focus just to walk normally and not bounce. Other cadets moved through the corridor in small groups. There were tall ones and short ones, cadets with scales and cadets with fur, cadets with 2 legs and cadets with 6. The Academy accepted species from over 300 worlds. It was supposed to be a place of unity, a melting pot, a symbol of cooperation across the stars. But every single one of those cadets moved out of the way when Jace walked past. Not with respect, with fear. He could see it in the way their eyes shifted, the way their conversations dropped to whispers, the way they pressed themselves against the walls as if he carried a disease. He had learned to stop noticing, or at least to stop showing that he noticed. Earth had only made first contact 6 years ago, and the Union had only admitted humans to the Academy 2 years after that. 3 human cadets had come before Jace. All 3 had dropped out. Not because they failed the coursework or the physical tests. They dropped out because no one would speak to them, train with them, or eat with them. One of them had found the word animal scratched into his door every morning for a month. Jace knew all of this before he applied. He applied anyway. The mess hall was a wide open space with long tables and a ceiling made of transparent alloy that showed the stars outside. Jace picked up a tray, selected a protein block and a cup of water, and sat at an empty table near the back wall. He ate slowly and without expression. Around him, the hall buzzed with dozens of alien languages being run through translation implants. Laughter, arguments, gossip, none of it included him. Then a tray clattered down across from him. Jace looked up. A small insectoid cadet stood on the other side of the table, wings folded tight against its back, compound eyes blinking rapidly. Pipikivol. Everyone called him Pip. He was a Tikani, barely 3 feet tall, with a thin exoskeleton the color of copper, and a voice like a nervous flute. "Is this seat taken?" Pip asked. His translation implant gave his words a slight wobble. "No," Jace said. Pip sat down. His legs dangled off the bench. He arranged his tray with great care, lining up each item in a perfect row. Then he looked at Jace with what might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell on an insectoid face. "I have a question about Earth," Pip said. Jace waited. "Is it true that water falls from the sky on your planet? Just falls, without any system or pump or schedule?" "Rain," Jace said. "Yes. Uncontrolled water. Falling from above, onto your head." "Yes, and you just walk around in it?" "Sometimes." Pip made a clicking sound that his implant translated as deep discomfort. "Your planet is terrifying." Jace almost smiled. "Almost. You get used to it." That was the closest thing to a normal conversation Jace had experienced in 11 weeks. An hour later, he sat in Tactical Theory, a large lecture hall filled with cadets from every branch and species. The instructor was Commander Dahen, a tall Vylori with silver-blue skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. He taught well. He was fair. He also never called on Jace unless he had no other choice. Today the topic was squad-based urban combat. Dahen put a scenario on the main display: a hostile structure, unknown number of enemies, 3 entry points, a civilian population on the upper floors. He asked the class for an approach. A few cadets raised their hands and gave cautious textbook answers. Dahen nodded politely at each one. Then he paused, eyes scanning the room, and landed on Jace. "Cadet Morrow, your assessment." Every head turned. Jace looked at the display for 2 seconds. Then he spoke. "Entry points 2 and 3 are traps. The angles favor defenders. You send a drone through point 1 to draw attention. Stack your squad on the west exterior wall. Breach through the window on the 2nd floor, and clear downward. Civilians are moved to the roof for extraction. Total operation time should be under 4 minutes." The room was silent. Dahen stared at him for a long moment. Then he blinked twice and said, "Correct. Almost exactly what the field manual recommends for this configuration." He paused. "In fact, the manual suggests 5 minutes, but 4 would work for a highly motivated squad." He looked back down at his datapad. In the back row of the lecture hall, a tall figure with 4 arms and pale gold skin sat with his jaw tight and his eyes burning. Vorath Kess, heir to the Kess noble house of Siloria, top of the class in 3 subjects, captain of the sparring team, and until 11 weeks ago, the most impressive cadet anyone at the academy had ever seen. He watched Jace Morrow sit quietly in his seat, and something ugly twisted behind his eyes. The human did not see it, but Pip, sitting 2 rows behind Jace, did, and it made his wings press flat against his back in the way his species did when they sensed a predator nearby. Something was coming. Pip could feel it, and he was very, very afraid. It started small, the kind of small that people could pretend was nothing. Jace opened his locker one morning and found his uniform slashed from collar to hem. Clean cuts, done with a blade, not claws. Someone had taken their time. His boots were gone. His tactical manual had been torn in half and stuffed into the water drain on the floor. He stood there for exactly 3 seconds, looking at the damage. Then he pulled out a repair kit, sat on the bench, and began stitching the uniform back together with steady hands. He did not curse. He did not slam the locker. He did not look around the room for witnesses. He simply fixed what was broken and moved on. Across the locker room, a Rethki cadet named Soren leaned against the far wall, with his arms folded over his scaled chest. He had a long snout, and yellow eyes that did not blink often enough. He watched Jace sew the uniform, and waited. He waited for the anger, the shout, the fist through the locker door. He waited for the animal to come out. But Jace just finished his stitching, put on the patched uniform, and walked out barefoot to requisition new boots. Soren's tail flicked once in confusion. That was not how prey was supposed to react. The next day, Jace found his datapad wiped clean. Every note, every assignment, Every file, gone. He spent 4 hours that night rewriting everything from memory. He did not report it. The day after that, someone changed the environmental settings in his quarters to drop the temperature to near freezing while he slept. Jace woke up covered in frost, breath coming out in white clouds. He got up, reset the controls, did his push-ups, and went to breakfast without mentioning it to anyone. On Earth, he had camped in snowstorms. A cold room was nothing, but it was not nothing. Not really. Jace knew what was happening. He had read about it in the files of the 3 cadets who came before him. It was a pattern. Isolation first, then sabotage, then intimidation, then something worse. The Academy had a word for it, buried deep in its regulations. Interspecies social friction. Jace had a simpler word for it. Bullying. And he knew exactly who was behind it. Vorath Kess moved through the Academy like he owned it, because in many ways he did. The Kess family had funded the construction of the Academy's Eastern Training Wing. Vorath's father sat on the Union's Military Advisory Council. Vorath himself was tall, strong, graceful, and brilliant. He had 4 arms that could each operate independently, a mind sharp enough to lead battlefield simulations, and a voice smooth enough to make other cadets follow him without question. He also had 6 loyal friends who did whatever he told them to do. There was Soren the Rethki, cold and patient. 2 Celery cadets named Tal and Veska, both from military families. A Kruvan named Dren, built like a walking boulder with arms thick as tree trunks. And 2 others. A wiry Fenith with needle-like teeth, and a quiet Oravan who never spoke but always watched with 3 unblinking eyes. 7 in total. 7 cadets who had decided that the human did not belong. Jace knew their names. He knew their routines. He knew which corridors they walked and which hours they trained. He did not know this because he was paranoid. He knew it because he was human, and humans were very, very good at watching. 2 weeks after the locker incident, the Academy held its regular hand-to-hand combat evaluation. Every cadet was required to participate. Pairs were assigned randomly by the training computer. Jace drew a Tauren. The room went quiet. Taurens were heavy-gravity species, thick bones, dense muscles, built like tanks. This particular Tauren, a cadet named Brock, stood nearly 7 feet tall and weighed close to 400 pounds. His skin was like gray stone. His hands were the size of dinner plates. Commander Dehen, who oversaw the sparring sessions, looked at the pairing on his screen and hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like he might reassign it. Then he looked at Jace, who stood calmly on the mat with his hands at his sides, and said nothing. The pairing stood. Brock stepped onto the mat and looked down at Jace the way a mountain looks at a pebble. He cracked his neck. The sound was like rocks grinding together. "No hard feelings, human," Brock rumbled. "I will try to be gentle." Jace said nothing. He shifted his weight slightly to his back foot and relaxed his shoulders. His breathing slowed. His eyes went still. Dehen gave the signal. Brock lunged forward with a massive overhand grab, the kind of move that worked on every species smaller than a Tauren. It was fast for someone his size. Unavoidable. Jace was not there. He stepped to the left, caught Brock's outstretched arm at the wrist and elbow, turned his hips, and redirected all 400 pounds of Tauren momentum into the mat. Brock hit the ground with a boom that shook the floor. Before he could rise, Jace had already dropped a knee across his back and locked the arm behind him in a hold that no amount of strength could break without tearing the joint apart. 4 seconds. The room was completely silent. Dehen looked at his timer, looked at Jace, and marked the score on his datapad without a word. Jace released Brock, helped him to his feet with a small nod, and walked off the mat. Brock stood there, rubbing his shoulder, staring after the human with an expression that was not anger. It was something closer to wonder. In the back of the training hall, Vorath Kess watched from behind the barrier rail. His 4 hands gripped the metal so hard it bent slightly under his fingers. Tal and Veska stood beside him, their faces pale. Soren's tail had gone completely still, which for a Rethki meant either deep thought or deep fear. "He is faster than the reports say," Veska whispered. Vorath said nothing for a long time. Then he turned and walked out of the hall, and his 6 followed. That evening, Pip found Jace in the corridor outside the library. The little Tikani was vibrating with anxiety, his wings buzzing in short, nervous bursts that his translation implant kept trying to interpret as words. "Jace," Pip said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." Jace stopped and looked down at him. "Okay?" "Vorath is talking to his group. I heard them in the lower rec room. They did not see me. I am small. People forget I am there." Pip's compound eyes were wide and dark. "He said he is going to teach you a lesson. He said, the Academy needs to see what happens when a Deathworlder forgets its place. He called you an animal, Jace. He said they are going to make you bleed." Jace listened to all of this without moving. His face showed nothing. When Pip finished, Jace was quiet for a moment. Then he crouched down, so he was at Pip's eye level. "Thank you, Pip," he said. "That took courage." "What are you going to do?" "I do not know yet." "You could report it. Go to the Commandant." Jace looked at him steadily. 3 humans came before me. They all filed reports. Do you know what happened?" Pip's wings drooped. He knew. Everyone knew. Nothing had happened. The reports were filed, noted, and buried under words like insufficient evidence and cultural misunderstanding. "Stay away from Vorath's group," Jace said. "Stay away from me too, for a while. I do not want you caught in the middle of this." "But, please, Pip." The little cadet clicked his mandibles once, softly, in the way his species did when they were sad. Then he nodded, and walked away down the corridor, glancing back twice. Jace watched him go. Then he stood up, rolled his shoulders, and let out a long, slow breath. Somewhere in the lower levels of the station, Vorath Kess sat in a dim maintenance office with his 6 allies around him. A map of the Academy's sub-level tunnel network glowed on the table between them. "Here," Vorath said, tapping a junction point with one long finger. "Sub-level 4. No cameras, no foot traffic after 2200. One way in, one way out." He looked around the room. "We send him a false duty order. He comes alone. We are waiting." 7 against 1 Deathworlder, Soren said slowly. "Is that enough?" Vorath's golden eyes narrowed. "He is one human. He is meat and bone and water. He is not a god. He is not a monster. He is a frightened little animal from a broken planet, and it is time the galaxy remembered that." Dren the Kruvan cracked his massive knuckles. The sound echoed in the small room like stones breaking. "Tomorrow night," Vorath said, "we end this." The message arrived on Jace's datapad at 2147 station time. A duty order. Report to Maintenance Sublevel 4, Junction C7, for environmental recalibration detail. Immediate. Solo. Assignment. Jace sat on the edge of his cot and read the message twice. Then he read it a third time, slowly, the way a hunter reads tracks in the mud. The formatting was wrong. The duty code used a prefix from 3 months ago that had since been updated. The authorization signature belonged to a Lieutenant Vask, who, as far as Jace knew, had transferred off the station 6 weeks prior. An environmental recalibration was a 2-person job at minimum, never assigned solo, and never at this hour. It was a fake, a sloppy one. Jace set the datapad down on the cot and stared at the photograph of his forest. The trees stood in their fog, patient and unmoving, the way they had stood for hundreds of years. He thought about Oregon. He thought about his mother, who had held his face in both her hands the day he left Earth, and said, "You are going to scare them, Jace. Not because you are dangerous, but because you will not break. And nothing frightens the universe more than something it cannot break." He stood up. He did not put on armor. He did not grab a weapon. He did not send a message to anyone. He stretched his hands, flexed his fingers until the knuckles popped, and rolled his neck once to each side. Then he pulled on his boots, stepped out of his quarters, and walked toward the sublevels. The corridors were quiet at this hour. Most cadets were in their rooms or in the recreation halls on the upper decks. The lower levels of the station were a maze of maintenance tunnels, utility conduits, and storage bays. The lighting down here was dim, set to a low amber glow to save power. The air was stale and carried a faint metallic taste. Every sound echoed. Footsteps, the hum of distant machinery, the occasional clank of pipes expanding and contracting in the cold. Jace moved through the tunnels without hurry. His footsteps were even and measured. His breathing was slow. He was not afraid. Fear was a signal, and he had received it, processed it, and filed it away in the part of his brain that dealt with useful information. What remained was clarity. He had spent his whole life on a planet that was trying to kill him. Earthquakes, wildfires, predators with teeth longer than his forearm, weather systems that could flatten a city in an hour, viruses that evolved faster than medicine could chase them. Earth did not care about fairness. Earth did not give warnings. Earth just came at you, and you either moved or you died. 7 cadets in a tunnel were not Earth. They were not even close. He reached junction C7 and stopped. The corridor widened here into a small open space where 3 tunnel paths met. Overhead, a row of utility lights cast pale circles on the metal floor. The air was cooler. The hum of the station's life support was louder, vibrating through the walls. They were already here. He could tell, not because he could see them. They were hidden in the shadows of the side tunnels and behind equipment housings, but because the air was different. It carried heat, body heat, 7 bodies worth of it, and there was a sound beneath the machinery hum. Breathing, fast breathing, nervous breathing. Jace walked to the center of the junction and stopped. He stood with his arms loose at his sides and his weight balanced evenly on both feet. He looked straight ahead and waited. The shadows moved. They came out from 3 directions, 2 from the left tunnel, 3 from the right. They formed a loose half-circle around him, closing off every exit. 7 figures, different sizes, different species, but all wearing the same expression, a mixture of anger and excitement and something they probably thought was confidence, but was actually just adrenaline. Vorath Kess stepped forward from the center of the group. He was the tallest one there, lean and golden-skinned, his forearms folded across his chest in a pose of authority. His eyes caught the low light and reflected it like polished coins. "Cadet Morrow," Vorath said. His voice was calm and smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who had never had to raise it to be heard. "Thank you for coming." Jace said nothing. "I want you to understand something," Vorath continued. He took one step closer. "This is not personal. This is not about you. This is about what you represent. Your kind does not belong here. You come from a broken world, a world of poison and violence, and you carry that poison with you wherever you go. The Academy made a mistake admitting your species. We are here to correct that mistake." The others shifted. Soren's yellow eyes gleamed in the dark. Dren cracked his knuckles, each one the size of a walnut. The Fenith bared its needle teeth. The Oravan's 3 eyes locked onto Jace like targeting systems. Vorath unfolded all four arms and spread them wide. You have a choice. You can leave this academy tonight. Walk away. Tell them you quit. No one has to get hurt. He paused. Or you can learn what it feels like to be prey. The silence stretched. 7 against 1. The tunnel was closed. No cameras, no witnesses, no rescue coming. Jace looked at Vorath Kess for a long, quiet moment. Then he looked at each of the others, one by one, taking exactly 1 second per face, measuring, calculating, reading their weight, their stance, their balance, the tension in their muscles, the distance between them. Then Jace did something that confused every single one of them. He exhaled. Not a sigh, not a gasp, a long, controlled exhale. Like a man setting down something heavy he had been carrying for a very long time. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. His fingers uncurled. His eyes, which had been still and watchful, became something else entirely. On Earth, there is a moment that every predator knows. The moment between deciding to move and actually moving. It is not a pause. It is a compression. Every muscle, every nerve, every fiber of the body pulls inward like a spring being pressed flat. The world slows down, sound fades, and then the spring releases. Jace moved. The first one to fall was the Fenith on his left. It was the closest, barely 6 feet away. Jace crossed that distance in a single explosive step and drove an open palm into its narrow chest. The strike was precise and devastatingly fast. It hit the nerve cluster just below the collarbone that every species with a centralized circulatory system shared. The Fenith folded like paper, legs gone, lungs empty, and hit the floor before its brain even registered what had happened. 2 seconds. Tal and Veska, the two Solori, came at him from the right. They were fast. 4 arms each, 8 total, reaching and grabbing. Jace ducked under Tal's lead grab, caught one of his lower arms, and pulled hard while stepping sideways. Tal's own momentum carried him forward and into Veska. The two of them tangled together, 8 arms trying to separate. And Jace helped the process along with a sharp knee to Tal's midsection that sent both Solori crashing into the tunnel wall. They went down in a heap of limbs and did not get up quickly. 5 seconds. Dren the Kruvan roared. He was enormous, nearly as big as the Tauren that Jace had pinned in the sparring ring, and he had picked up a length of metal pipe from somewhere. He swung it in a wide, crushing arc that would have shattered bone if it connected. It did not connect. Jace stepped inside the arc, so close that the pipe whistled past behind his back, and locked both hands onto Dren's outstretched arm. 1 hand on the wrist, 1 on the elbow. He twisted in opposite directions, using Dren's own mass and momentum against him. There was a wet pop. Dren screamed and dropped the pipe. His arm hung at an angle that arms were not supposed to hang at. Jace released him and stepped back. Dren stumbled sideways into the wall, cradling his dislocated joint, and slid to the floor. 8 seconds. Soren and the Auravan had hung back, waiting, watching. But now they were the only ones standing besides Vorath, and their confidence was evaporating like water on a hot engine. Soren hissed and lunged low, trying to sweep Jace's legs with his tail. Jace read it a full second before it happened. He jumped the sweep, came down on Soren's extended tail with 1 boot, and delivered a short, sharp elbow to the back of the Rethke's skull. Soren collapsed face first into the deck and did not move. The Auravan tried to run. Jace caught him in 2 strides, hooked an arm around his torso, and brought him to the ground with a controlled takedown that was almost gentle compared to everything that had come before. A single pressure hold on the Auravan's neck cluster sent all 3 of its eyes rolling back, unconscious, breathing, unharmed beyond a headache it would feel for days. 12 seconds. Vorath Kess stood alone. He had not moved from his spot. His forearms were raised in a fighting stance, a proper one, academy-trained, technically perfect. But his hands were shaking. His golden skin had gone pale. His eyes were wide, and for the first time since Jace had known him, there was no arrogance in them. There was only fear. Jace turned to face him. He was not breathing hard. There was no sweat on his forehead. His uniform was not even wrinkled. He looked exactly the same as he had when he walked in, except for his eyes. His eyes were the eyes of something ancient, something forged in fire and flood and famine, something that had spent 1,000,000 years climbing to the top of a food chain that never stopped trying to drag it back down. Vorath swallowed. "Stay back," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. Jace closed the distance in 2 calm strides. Vorath threw a punch with his upper right arm. Jace caught it. Vorath swung with his upper left. Jace caught that too. For one frozen moment, they stood face to face. 2 of Vorath's forearms locked in Jace's grip, and Vorath realized with sickening clarity that the human was stronger than him. Not by a little, by a lot. Jace twisted one arm behind Vorath's back, swept his legs, and drove him face first into the deck. He pinned him there with one knee between the shoulder blades, and held the locked arm at an angle that was 1 degree away from breaking. 14 seconds. The tunnel was silent, except for groaning and the hum of the station's machinery. 7 bodies lay on the floor. 1 human stood over them, barely breathing above his resting rate. Jace leaned down close to Vorath's ear. Vorath was trembling. His cheek was pressed against the cold metal floor, and he could feel the human's breath on the side of his face. Warm breath. The breath of something that had not even needed to try. "On Earth," Jace said quietly, "we call what you just did a mistake." He held the pin for 3 more seconds. Then he released Vorath's arm, stood up, straightened his uniform, and walked out of the tunnel the same way he had walked in. Calm, quiet, unhurried. Behind him, 7 cadets lay scattered across Junction C7 like broken toys. Some groaned. Some did not move at all. Vorath Kess lay on the floor and stared at the ceiling with all the understanding of a creature that had just discovered it was not at the top of the food chain. The infirmary on Deck 9 was not built for this. It was designed to handle training injuries, pulled muscles, cracked exoskeletons, the occasional sparring bruise that went too far. It was not designed to handle 7 cadets arriving at once, carried on stretchers, all of them injured by the same person within the span of 15 seconds. Dr. Ulani, the chief medical officer, was a Veilori with silver-green skin and a reputation for never showing surprise. She showed surprise tonight. She moved between the beds with quick, efficient steps, scanning each patient with her diagnostic tool and calling out injuries to her assistants, in a voice that got quieter as the list got longer. Soren, mild concussion, bruising to the posterior skull. Tal, 2 cracked ribs, strained ligaments in 3 of 4 shoulders. Veska, deep muscle contusion to the midsection, mild spinal compression. Dren, dislocated elbow, torn rotator tissue, significant pain response. The Fenith, collapsed lung, already reinflating with treatment. The Oravan, pressure-induced syncope, recovering consciousness, headache. Vorath Kess, strained wrist, facial contusion from impact with the deck floor, and bruised pride that no scanner could measure. Dr. Ulani finished her rounds and stood in the middle of the infirmary. She looked at her datapad. She looked at the 7 beds. Then she looked at her assistant. "One person did this?" she asked. "Yes, doctor." "The human?" "Yes, doctor." Ulani was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that her assistant would remember for a very long time. "The injuries are precise. Every single one of them is exactly enough to neutralize, and not a fraction more. No broken bones where a break was not necessary. No strikes to lethal zones. No excessive force." She paused. He was not trying to hurt them. He was trying to stop them. There is a very important difference. By morning, the entire academy knew. Not because of any official announcement. The academy tried to keep it quiet. But 7 cadets in the infirmary at the same time was hard to hide. And cadets talked. They always talked. By breakfast, every mess hall table, every study group, every barracks corridor was buzzing with the same story. 7-on-1. In the tunnels, the human won. In seconds. The details grew with each telling, as details always do. Some versions said it was 10 seconds, some said 5. One version, popular among the first-year cadets, claimed that Jace had not even used his hands, that he had just looked at them and they had fallen down. This was not true, but the fact that people believed it said something about how the academy now viewed Cadet Morrow. The footage surfaced at 0900. Vorath had chosen Junction C7 because the main security cameras had been disabled there for maintenance. What he had not known was that a backup environmental monitoring system had been installed 3 weeks earlier as part of a station-wide safety upgrade. It was not a security camera. It was an atmospheric sensor with a low-resolution visual feed meant to detect gas leaks. But it had a wide-angle lens, and it had recorded everything. The file appeared on the Academy's internal network at 0900. No one knew who posted it. Speculation ranged from a sympathetic technician to an automated data leak. It did not matter. Within an hour, every cadet and instructor at Jujma had seen the footage. By 1000, Commandant Sayeth called a formal disciplinary hearing. Commandant Sayeth was old, even by Valori standards, which meant she had been alive for nearly 400 years. She had fought in 2 interstellar conflicts, commanded a fleet of 60 ships, and once negotiated a ceasefire with a species that communicated entirely through patterns of bioluminescent rage. She was not a person who was easily shaken. She watched the footage 3 times in her office before the hearing began. Then she sat in silence for several minutes, her 4 eyes closed, her fingers pressed together in front of her face. The hearing took place in the Academy's formal chamber, a circular room with tiered seating and a raised platform at the center. Vorath Kess and his 6 allies sat on one side, most of them still bandaged or wearing medical braces. Jace Morrow sat on the other side, alone, in a clean uniform with his hands folded in his lap. He looked exactly the way he always looked. Calm, quiet, present. The room was full. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Cadets who could not find seats stood along the walls. Even instructors had come, including Commander Dehen, who stood near the back with his arms crossed and his face unreadable. Commandant Sayeth opened the proceedings with a summary of events. The false duty order, the fight, the injuries. She presented the footage on the main display, and the room watched in silence as 15 seconds of violence played out on the screen. When it ended, she turned to Vorath first. "Cadet Kess," she said, "you organized and led an unprovoked physical assault on a fellow cadet using a forged duty order to lure him into an isolated location. You brought 6 accomplices. You blocked all exits. You intended to cause physical harm. Is this accurate?" Vorath's lawyer, a civilian advocate hired by the Kess family and patched in via holographic link, began speaking about context and provocation, and the emotional stress of interspecies integration. Sayeth let him talk for exactly 90 seconds, then raised one hand. "I asked the cadet," she said, "not you." Vorath lifted his chin. Even now, even with a bruise on his cheek and a brace on his wrist, he tried to look dignified. "The human is a threat to this academy," he said. "His species is violent by nature. We were defending ourselves." "You were defending yourselves," Sayeth repeated, "by sending a false order, hiding in a dark tunnel, and surrounding an unarmed cadet with 7 armed individuals." Vorath did not answer. Sayeth turned to Jace. "Cadet Morrow, You recognize the duty order as false. Yes, Commandant. Yet you went anyway. Yes, Commandant. Why did you not report the threat to Academy security? The room leaned forward. This was the question everyone wanted to hear answered. Jace was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands, then at Saith, and when he spoke, his voice was level and clear, and carried to every corner of the chamber, because no one at this academy has ever acted on a report filed by a human. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Jace had ever heard. It filled the room, like water filling a tank, pressing against the walls, against the ceiling, against every person sitting in those seats. He saw instructors shift in their chairs. He saw cadets look down at their hands. He saw Commandant Saith's 4 eyes blink, slowly, one pair at a time. She did not challenge the statement. She did not ask for evidence, because everyone in that room knew it was true. Then a voice spoke from the gallery, small, thin, shaking like a leaf in a wind tunnel. I would like to testify. Every head turned. Pip stood in the 3rd row of the gallery, his copper exoskeleton catching the light, his wings pressed flat against his back, his compound eyes wide with terror. He was so small that the cadets on either side of him had not even noticed he was there. The chair recognizes Cadet Pipiki Vol, Saith said. Pip walked down to the floor, on legs that trembled visibly. He stood at the testimony point, a small circle of light on the platform, and he looked like a candle flame that could be blown out by a single breath. But he spoke. He told them everything. He told them about the locker, the slashed uniform, the wiped datapad, the frozen quarters. He told them about the whispers in the corridors, the words scratched into doors, the 3 humans who had come before Jace and been driven out by the same kind of cruelty. He told them about overhearing Vorath's plan. He told them about warning Jace. And then he said something that no one expected. I was afraid to come here today, Pip said. His voice cracked, and his wings buzzed once before he steadied them. I am still afraid, but Jace Morrow has been at this academy for 12 weeks, and in that time, he has not raised his voice, he has not started a fight, he has not complained, and he has not asked anyone for help. He has been insulted, robbed, sabotaged, and attacked, and the worst thing he has done is defend himself in a fight he did not want. If that is what a Deathworlder looks like, then maybe we should be ashamed that it took a Deathworlder to show us what discipline actually means. The gallery did not applaud. It did something worse. It stayed silent, and in that silence, people thought. The deliberation took 2 hours. When Saith returned, her face was carved from stone. Vorath Kess and all 6 of his accomplices were suspended from active training for 60 days, and placed on formal disciplinary probation for the remainder of their enrollment. Any further incident would result in immediate expulsion. The Kess family civilian advocate protested loudly through his holographic link, until Saith muted him with a single button press. Jace Morrow received a formal reprimand for failure to report a known threat to Academy security. Everyone knew it. The reprimand would sit in his file like a pebble in a shoe. Small, irritating, and ultimately meaningless. As the hearing ended and cadets filed out of the chamber, Jace passed Pip in the corridor. The little Tikani looked up at him with eyes that were still wet with fear, but also with something else. Something that looked like the beginning of pride. You did not have to do that, Jace said quietly. Yes, I did, Pip said. Someone had to. Jace looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something he had not done since arriving at the academy. He smiled. It was small, just a slight lift at the corners of his mouth, there and gone in a second. But Pip saw it, and it made his wings lift just a little bit off his back for the first time in weeks. Behind them, the footage played on a loop in the common rooms and study halls across the station. Cadets watched it again and again. They watched the way Jace moved, the speed, the precision, the control. They watched a human dismantle 7 attackers without breaking a sweat, without making a sound, without using a single ounce of unnecessary force. And slowly, very slowly, they began to realize something. They had been afraid of the wrong thing. They had been afraid that the human was dangerous, but the footage did not show a dangerous animal. It showed a person in complete control. A person who could have caused real damage, permanent damage, and chose not to. A person who ended a fight in 15 seconds and then walked away. The most dangerous thing about Jace Morrow was not what he could do, it was what he chose not to do. And that was far, far more frightening. The change did not come all at once. It did not arrive like a wave or a storm, or any of the dramatic things that stories like to pretend change looked like. It came the way dawn comes, so slowly that you could not point to the exact moment the darkness ended. But when you looked up, the light was there, and it had been there for a while. The first sign was the corridor. 3 days after the hearing, Jace was walking from his quarters to the morning lecture, when a Tauren cadet stepped into his path. It was Brock, the same Tauren that Jace had pinned in the sparring ring weeks ago. He was still enormous, still made of what appeared to be gray stone wrapped in muscle. He blocked the corridor simply by existing in it. Jace stopped. Brock looked down at him. His face was unreadable, set in the permanent frown that Taurens wore the way other species wore skin. Then he spoke, and his voice rumbled through the corridor like a distant avalanche. "Good fight," Brock said. 2 words, nothing more. Then Brock stepped aside and continued walking. He did not look back. Jace stood there for a moment, processing. Then he gave a small nod to the empty corridor and kept walking. It was not much, but it was the first time a cadet other than Pip had spoken to him without fear, disgust, or hostility in their voice. The second sign was the mess hall. At lunch the following day, Jace sat at his usual table in the back corner. Pip was already there, arranging his food in neat rows, chattering about a propulsion theory exam he was studying for. Then a tray appeared on the table to Jace's left. He looked up. A Valori cadet stood there. She was young, with silver-blue skin and 2 pairs of eyes that studied Jace with cautious curiosity. Her name was Sane. She was quiet, serious, and had never spoken to Jace before. "May I sit?" she asked. "Yes," Jace said. Sane sat down. She ate in silence for a minute, then said, "In tactical class yesterday, Commander Dehen discussed flanking formations against entrenched positions. You answered his question about the weak side approach. I did not understand your reasoning. Would you explain it?" Jace looked at her. She was not afraid. She was not performing kindness for an audience. She had a question, and she believed he could answer it, and that was enough. He explained. He talked about angles of fire, dead zones, and the way human soldiers had learned to read terrain on Earth, where every hill, every tree, every rock could be the difference between life and death. He spoke simply and clearly, the way he always did, and Sane listened with all 4 of her eyes focused entirely on him. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "On my world, we do not think about terrain that way. We do not have terrain that tries to kill us." "You are lucky," Jace said. "Perhaps," Sane said. Then she paused and added, "Or perhaps we are simply unprepared." Pip, who had been listening with his mandibles hanging slightly open, looked back and forth between them, like a spectator at a sport he did not fully understand, but found very exciting. His wings lifted with a happy buzz. By the end of that week, 3 other cadets had joined the table. Not every day, not always the same ones. But the empty space around Jace Morrow was shrinking, and the silence that had followed him for 12 weeks was filling with voices. The third sign was Commander Dahen. The following Monday, Dahen opened his tactical class with an announcement. He said that the curriculum would be expanding to include a new module, Interspecies Combat Doctrines, with particular focus on Deathworld tactical philosophies. He described it as part of a broader initiative for comprehensive interspecies readiness, using exactly the kind of language that Academy bureaucracy loved, because it sounded important without admitting fault. But as he spoke, his eyes found Jace in the second row, and he gave a nod so small that no one else in the room would have caught it. It lasted less than a second, but it said everything. I see you. I see what you did, and I am going to make sure it was not for nothing. Jace returned the nod with one of his own. Then he opened his datapad and started taking notes like it was any other class on any other day. After that, things moved faster. Not all of it was positive. Vorath Kess and his group, still on probation, still nursing their wounds and their pride, watched from the edges of the social landscape with bitter eyes. They were not gone. They were not reformed. They were simply quiet, which was not the same thing. Jace knew this. He always kept watching. But for every pair of hostile eyes, there were now 2 pairs of curious ones. Cadets who had never considered speaking to a human were suddenly asking questions. What was Earth really like? Was it true that humans could run for hours without stopping? Was it true that they healed from broken bones? Was it true that their planet had an animal called a honey badger that attacked creatures 50 times its size out of pure stubbornness? That last one was Pip's fault. He had been researching Earth fauna in the library and had become obsessed with honey badgers, which he described to anyone who would listen as tiny armored demons with no concept of self-preservation. Jace did not correct him. It was, if anything, an understatement. Then the message came. It arrived on Jace's datapad on a Tuesday evening, encrypted, routed through 3 relay stations, and marked with an Earth origin header. He opened it in his quarters, sitting on the edge of his cot, with a forest photograph above his head. The message was from a woman named Asha Okonkwo. She was 20 years old. She was from Lagos, Nigeria. She had scored in the top 1% on the Union's military aptitude assessment, and she had been accepted to the Galactic Union Joint Military Academy, class of next year. She was going to be the 5th human to attempt the program. Her message was short. Cadet Morrow, I know who you are. I know what happened. They told me no human has ever made it past the first year. I heard you are about to. I wanted you to know that I am coming, and I am not afraid. Save me a seat. Jace read the message twice. Then he set the datapad down and looked at the photograph on the wall. The forest, the fog, the river, home. He had not cried since arriving at the academy. He had not cried at the loneliness, or the sabotage, or the cold, or the insults, or the ambush. Humans were very good at not crying. They had spent thousands of years teaching themselves that tears were weakness. And even though Jace knew that was wrong, the lesson had sunk deep enough that his eyes stayed dry through almost anything. But now, alone in his small room, reading a message from a stranger on the other side of the galaxy who had called him brave without using the word, he felt something warm press against the back of his eyes. He blinked it away, but he allowed himself the smile. A real one this time. Not the small, careful thing he had given Pip in the corridor. A full smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face, and made him look, for just a moment, like the 22-year-old kid from Oregon that he actually was. I will save you a seat, he said to the empty room. That night, Jace went to the observation deck. It was a long, curved chamber on the top level of the station, with a transparent ceiling that showed the full sweep of the galaxy. Stars everywhere. Billions of them. Whole civilizations spinning in the dark. Most of them on soft, warm, gentle worlds where the rain did not fall sideways, the ground did not shake, and nothing with teeth was waiting in the tall grass. He stood with his hands behind his back and watched the stars for a while. Footsteps behind him, small ones, clicking on the metal floor. Pip appeared beside him. The Takani said nothing at first. He just stood there, copper shell reflecting the starlight, and looked out at the galaxy with his compound eyes that could see colors humans could not even name. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes. Then Pip spoke. "Jace, yes. Is it true that on Earth, your species used to hunt animals 10 times your size, for fun?" He thought about the mammoth hunters, the whale hunters, the people who had chased lions across open plains with nothing but sharpened sticks, and the stubborn belief that being smaller did not mean being weaker. "Not for fun," he said, "for survival. Everything on Earth is trying to kill you. We just got really good at saying no." Pip made his clicking sound, the one his implant translated as deep thought. Then he said, "I think the galaxy is going to have to get used to you." Jace looked down at the little insectoid cadet, who had been his first friend, his only friend for the longest 12 weeks of his life. Pip, who weighed less than a house cat, who could be knocked over by a strong gust of wind, who had stood up in a room full of people 10 times his size, and said what needed to be said because someone had to. "I think the galaxy is going to have to get used to both of us," Jace said. Pip's wings lifted, not from fear this time, from something better. They stood together on the observation deck and watched the stars turn. Below them, the academy hummed with life, 1,000 cadets from 100 worlds, all of them learning, slowly, what it meant to share the universe with a species that had been forged in the fire of a death world and come out the other side, not as monsters, but as people. Scarred, stubborn, endlessly adaptable people who carried the memory of every storm, every predator, every earthquake, every ice age in their bones, and used it not to conquer, but to endure. The galaxy had spent centuries cataloging death worlds. They had mapped their dangers, quarantined their ecosystems, studied their deadly atmospheres and poisonous oceans from a safe distance. They had built entire academic fields around understanding why death worlds were places to be avoided at all costs. But they had never stopped to ask the one question that mattered. What kind of creature survives a world that is trying to kill it every single day and comes out gentle? What kind of species learns to break bones and chooses not to? What kind of heart gets forged in a furnace and still knows how to be kind? The answer was standing on the observation deck of the Galactic Union Joint Military Academy, watching the stars with a 3-foot-tall insectoid who he would protect with his life. The answer was human, and he was not going anywhere.